The Poor Deception. This will be another commentary with a Bible lesson in it, but not necessarily a Bible study. There is a big blur and delusion being cast today upon the world, and it is now made clear and manifest that people no longer understand what it really means to be poor and in need. What many, even the majority, label as poor today are far from actually being poor. The modern definition of poor seems to mean that many do not have hundreds or thousands of dollars to blow at their whims, or cannot afford every little thing that their hearts desire. Well, welcome to the real world. Let's take a look at some of the real statistics concerning this so-called average poor today. The average so-called poor household in America today brings in roughly $34,000 a year. Now, I did not say that they earn that much. I said the average so-called poor household in America brings in $34,000 a year. Many middle-class working make less than that per year, working 40 hours a week or more. The average so-called poor household in America has at least one, and some even two, flat screen or high-definition televisions. I can remember when having a TV at all was something big in itself. And to have a color TV, well, that was big time. But not today. And the average so-called poor household in America today has internet, usually between 1 and 3 computers, between 1 and 3 cell phones, or iPads, or Blackberries, or Androids, on which they can text or go on the internet or email back and forth, go on Facebook or any of a number of other social websites, and they call themselves poor. The average so-called poor household in America dines out at least 2 to 3 times a week, has central air and heat, or at least some form of air conditioning. The average so-called poor household has at least one car. Many have 2 or more. The average poor household in America has at least 2 different kinds of video games, either a Wii or a PlayStation 2 or 3, and either a VCR or a VTR, or something on which to record television shows from their cable provider or DirecTV. The average so-called poor household has clothes with big names, designer clothes, jewelry, body piercings, and etc. Now, those are necessary expenditures, right? Those are things which poor people have to have. They're a must. As I alluded to earlier, the average so-called household in America brings in $34,000 a year. Some of these earn a portion of that. The rest is either given to them by entitlement, such as welfare, Medicaid, WIC, SNAP, or other grants for low-income housing, which either pays their rent or assists in paying their rent. Many received free or reduced lunches at schools, or some other form of aid or entitlement, such as Medicaid. This is not to say that there are not really poor people in America. There are, and indeed worldwide. There are those that live in tent cities or who sleep on park benches. or panhandle or stand on the curb holding signs begging for money. And when we look back at the Great Depression, which gripped this nation many years ago, we see a vast difference between the poor then and the poor now. The poor then really were poor. Back then the people were thin, emaciated. They wore old rags for clothing. Many of them didn't even have shoes to wear. But again, this is not the case today for the so-called poor. Those who call themselves poor today are usually clad in golden necklaces, rings, earrings, and again body piercings. Most often they are obese. In fact, the average American is overweight, unless of course they are a supermodel. Then they weigh anywhere from 60 pounds to 100 pounds. In short, what I'm saying is the modern world has been so indoctrinated and so confused by what is called conventional wisdom by today's standards, till they do not even know what it means to be poor. And since they don't know what it means to be poor, they gather themselves together and protest and occupy and blame the rich for every problem in the world. They are the modern hippies, meaning they are unwashed, loud, obnoxious, self-centered, self-righteous, and they gather together in mass. And they aren't even sure exactly what they are protesting for, other than they think what they're doing is the right thing to do. Because some voice or some political force, some community organization told them it's the right thing to do and bust them in to protest. They live by communal means. They love redistribution of wealth and socialization of the world mentality. They love it when everything that shouldn't be is made or called right, and where everything that should be is changed and made to look foolish or ignorant. Socialism, to be more precise, is the doctrine they push. And once it takes hold, this socialism, it is not very far removed from communism. Why and how has this nation become so spoiled and self-important? It is because they have been conditioned to do so, brainwashed, indoctrinated, and not taught the value of real truth or real morality or real fairness. It is because slowly mankind has been conditioned to change his way of thinking from love thy neighbor as thyself and caring for others to turning the grand camera lens upon himself and becoming self-important to the point that he can rationalize anything, even blatant unfairness, as right and justified. In so doing, man can say that if some have to pay more so that others don't have to strive as hard, and others can toil so that the less fortunate can have the same standard of living as those who do work hard, then that's just the way it has to be. They never care until it hits home with them. And then they become subject to the same rules they push on others. And once this happens, what do? They whine and cry foul and protest again. It is as a man who builds a wall, never perceiving that the wall he is building will eventually encompass him and lock him away from freedom. But because it happens slowly, he doesn't see it until it's too late. And then he can't break back through to freedom, meaning he cannot stop it or turn it back. And this is what has happened in this nation. The self-righteous will act by knee-jerk reaction and think themselves to be fighting the good fight as they protest and occupy. Yet what they are really doing is lending their voices and their support to the cause of socialism, which, once enacted, just as we have seen in the past, will swallow and control them as it does all the rest. I have said many times, deception cannot happen if people are wise to it and aware of it. Which is why deception cloaks itself as something it is not, and as it always has. Most of the time, deception hides itself behind good, or what is seemingly right. It entrenches itself where it cannot be detected. Because if it didn't, it would be discovered, and then it would fail. And so deception does cloak itself. It hides and waits until the day it has enough power that it no longer needs to hide. And by then, it's too late. Deception has taken over. I use this analogy a lot, but I think it works very well. Do you think that the college girls who were murdered by serial killer Ted Bundy would have willingly climbed into his car and gone with him if they were aware that he was about to kill them? In other words, if they were aware of what his intentions were? Of course not. And they would still be alive. But they were deceived, not because they were below average intelligence, but because they did not see the deception. And they trusted his outward appearance and in his charming, polite, funny mannerisms. His charisma. And this is the method of Satan. It is also the method by which Satan shall deceive the world, save of God's elect, when he is finally cast down to earth and comes claiming to be Jesus Christ returned. This is what the word Antichrist in Greek means. Instead of Christ. In place of Christ. In the stead or placement of Christ. And oh, how many will fall and worship this archangel because of his beauty and splendor. And he does have beauty and splendor, though he is evil, as written in Ezekiel 28, which gives Satan this description. This is how he beguiled Eve, way back in Genesis chapter 3. But before Satan arrives in this world, the world has to be conditioned to his deception. Wrong has to be made to look right, and right has to be made to look wrong or foolish. Christianity has to be made to look foolish, superstitious, and so on. Christianity has to be removed from educational institutions and replaced with science and scientific explanation for everything. That is to say, man's wisdom, taking over where God's wisdom had been. And this has happened. Man's greedy, self-righteous wisdom has taken over. The wisdom of God, the wisdom of fairness, the wisdom of justice, the wisdom of righteousness. In our educational system, the educational standards have been lowered and repressed. Teenagers are being passed through school not even knowing how to spell big words or how to do math. Many cannot even count back change if they work behind a cash register. They have to depend on the machine, the cash register, to tell them how much change to give back. And if the machine screws up, then they have to call for a manager because they can't count the change back. And all this is because it might have hurt their feelings if they were held back or if they made a bad grade. So man's wisdom has come up with a contingency plan for that. Man's wisdom says we must make sure that this does not happen. It's called No Child Left Behind. And when it began, it was a noble pursuit. It sounded like something wonderful. It sounded like no child would receive less of an education than another because steps would be taken by educators to make sure that children were tutored or given special attention that they would learn. And no doubt that was the original intent. But as with all things that can be manipulated, now it has been reversed. Kids are given rewards, certificates, and trophies for underachieving. I have personally seen this happen. The standard for second grade was for a child to be able to count to 1,000 or higher. And the ones that were able to count to 1,000 were given a certificate that said, "Well done. You can count to 1,000. But other children who could only count to 10, even though the standard was to count to 1,000, or could only count to 100, even though the standard was to count to 1,000, were also giving certificates and trophies saying, "Well done, you can count to 10," or "Well done, you can count to 100. So then, what is the motivation for children to learn to count to 1,000? You see, this is what socialism represents, and it's what communism means. All are equal, even when they are not. And no one dare say different. So now kids have been conditioned to go from one grade to the next, whether they have achieved the standard or not, and then to go on from high school to institutions of higher education, so-called, where they can be indoctrinated even further with even more Marxist philosophy. Then once they graduate from there, they can work or not, they can strive or not, they can achieve or not. It doesn't matter, because the system, the so-called safety net, will protect them from the harsh reality of life by pandering to them, by giving them entitlements, keeping them up, and all at the expense of the hard-working taxpayer, or those who have achieved and did become successful through hard work and toil. In short, those who work, those who strive, those who toil will be penalized to make up for those who won't work, who won't achieve, who won't better themselves. So what message does this send? Especially to youth. It says, well, I can work, or I don't have to. Or I can work hard, or I don't have to, and I can still have the same. And knowing man's lazy nature, what do you suppose the majority will choose? And what will be the incentive to work? What will be the incentive to make more money, to strive? Just so socialist politicians can draft laws and make policies to tax them even more and take away the extra that they have earned and give it to those who don't feel like working that hard. This is why so many American companies have gone overseas. Not because they are greedy, not because they don't care about their country, but they have been forced to be able to survive. They could not survive on American soil with the taxation they were subjected to and the overly high union pay they were forced to pay out. I should say, extorted to pay. So what choice did they have? Stay here in America and pay more and eventually be run out of business, or move overseas and pay foreigners less to be able to produce their goods. Now sure, there is some corporate greed in this. There are always exceptions to every rule. But for the most part, the honest businesses have been run out of America by design. The design of socialism. The design of one world government, where we are forced to be dependent upon other nations for our energy, for our oil, even though we have an abundance which we are not allowed by our own government to touch because of environmental concerns. In other words, lies. And as our nation plummets and taxes are raised despite the promises of those who said they would not raise taxes, and as entitlements are paid out and money is wasted on pork barrel pandering, our nation gets poorer and we lose our credibility not only at home but also abroad. And then other nations run in to buy up our debt, which they can later demand of us and use to tear us down and force us into global government. And all of this concocted as one big ruse of deception that only a few saw coming and the majority fell for. And why? Because they thought there was something in it for them. Something for nothing. Pay without hard work. Reward without achievement. Everyone made equal. I should say made equally poor and equally socialized. They only think they're poor now. Wait until they really are. Wait until there is no more government to run in to their aid. Of course, by then, they can trade their soul to the false Christ, not knowing his real identity, because much like how they dealt in their daily lives with God and his word, in other words, they didn't see the deception coming because they were not studied of his word, they didn't prepare, they were lazy, and they let others decide for them and tell them what was right and wrong, or fair and just, or tell them what the Bible says, then they will be ripe for deception. In this life, from the time we are children, we are taught that there are rules and laws which must be abided by to live in peace and to stay out of trouble. Well, I should say some of us are taught that anyway. There are those who are not taught right from wrong, those who cannot discern truth from lies. Nevertheless, for the rest of us, we are shown from our life's experiences that we have to abide by the rules. But there are always those who teach and live by the reverse. They attempt to skirt the rules, to get around it, to rebel. And some feel that if others have more than they do, then someone must step in, usually government, and equalize things. They must make things exactly even. They practice the policy of taking from some and giving to others. The war of classes, in other words. And they do this usually to achieve power. And man in the flesh is greedy and self-centered and willing to be a part of this redistribution, even when it is absolutely unfair. Because some live by the get-you-back mentality. Somebody must be made to pay for my poorness or my situation in life. And we are programmed daily by radio, by TV, by movies, by books, and by many of our educational institutions with the idea that the rules of life can be bent or broken. They can be changed so that some can have their way while others must pay the price or give up part of what they have to bring this about, this so-called equalization. We allow them to reward people who do not achieve or who underachieve with the same reward as those who work and strive very hard to succeed. We allow such considerations as economical status or race to decide who gains and who loses, who gets rewarded and who gets penalized. And more often than not, it's the opposite of what is fair and what is right. You know, one of the rights God has given us as human beings is free will. The free will to choose between doing things God's way or the fleshly way. To choose to do that which is right or to choose that which is the easy way and is most often wrong. To choose the easy way or the proper way. The right to choose freedom or to choose communism through its socialist catalyst. And that is much like the controversy of the Bible. The war between good and evil. The war between God and Satan. Because the path to God is through Christ. It is life. While the path to Satan only leads to death. And by the same turn of the coin, the choice of communism, though we are free to choose it, inevitably leads to loss of freedom and control. Yet so many will choose it because of the free ride it offers, the equalization it promises, which they will receive for a time. But in the end, they will end up controlled and put into captivity and used as weights to sink themselves in the great flood of deception. It's funny. They believe not the Word of God, or they never bother to read His Word, but they believe the newspapers, or they believe the media, or they believe lying politicians or even presidents who have proven that they are more prone to lead towards world government and politically correct multiculturalism and war of classes than they are the American way, or to seek the counsel of God Almighty. Why is it some today feel more inclined to believe in modern idealism, which was handed down, or modern idealism, which was handed down from Marxist ideology, or self-centeredness, than they are to believe that which was handed down by God Almighty Himself? Well, one reason is the blending of cultures. This has been done. While this blending can be a strength, like all things, it can also be a destructive element. Just as we read in the books of Paul when he visited Mars Hill, where there were temples built to any and every god that man could ever conceive of from the minds of men. And even one temple to the unknown God, because they didn't want to leave anyone out. They didn't want to offend any god. So they had a temple to Jupiter, a temple to Mars, a temple to Zeus, a temple to whoever, Ishtar, Ashtaroth, and a temple to the unknown God. And so since they could not choose, and because they had so many vast gods, they were in confusion, much like the world today, with the many religions from the many different cultures. And in this we have lost the truth that has been carried with our people since Moses was given the laws from God on Mount Sinai. Which most or many of those laws have been the fundamentals we have lived by since that time to this very day. Only now they've been contorted and destroyed and made to work in reverse by lawyers and crooked politicians and those who really have the power. You know them well if you've listened to my other lectures. The sons of Cain. The poor are a fact of life. Jesus said, "The poor you have always with you." But stop for a moment and think about all those which Christ produced bread and fish for. And out of all those thousands who not only saw this miracle, but were fed of it, and saw the other miracles that He did, how many stood up on Jesus Christ's behalf when it was time to choose between Him, the Son of God, and Barabbas the murderer? Well, apparently not so many as He provided food for. Now, I know that there are many Christians who are of a more socialist ideology of late, who take the example of the rich man who had much wealth and many possessions, who came to Christ and said, "What must I do to enter the kingdom of heaven?" And Jesus told him, "Go and sell all thou hast and give it to the poor. Then come and follow me." And the man walked away because he had many possessions. And Jesus said, "It is harder for the rich to enter the gates of heaven than it is for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle." Now, many of you really need to learn that analogy, what it really means. But the real message behind that is not heard. Rather, it's used as a rallying cry by those that claim the rich of the world are evil, and that Christ was the first socialist. And this is not only a false doctrine and a misassumption on their part, they completely missed the point of what Christ was trying to say to this one man. Do you realize that if this man had done as Christ asked, he would have been one of Christ's disciples? But no, many do not see the real message that Christ was showing to him and to us. That was that he was given the choice between following the Son of God and becoming one of his messengers, one of his apostles, or living in his earthly, flesh-pleasing wealth. And given that choice, this man chose to turn his back on Christ and kept his earthly treasures, and in so doing forsook the treasures he might have laid in store in heaven. But no, many of the Christian socialists use this as a war cry upon anyone who has more, anyone who's done well for themselves. Like jealous children who covet the new toys of other children. And they cry foul and whine and have tantrums. They gather in protest. Is this not like what's happening now in the pro-socialist movement in America and worldwide? Is this not a template for the Occupy movement, which rails against the rich, even though the rich pay 40% of the taxation of America? Probably more if the true statistics were known. But if such taxation was forced upon them on behalf of those who have even less than they do you suppose that they would still protest? Do you suppose that they would still rally together? Do you think that they would still feel that it was right and fair? Oh, but they don't consider that. Oh, no. All they consider is what they want right now, what they demand right now. Again, like spoiled children who are jealous and act neglected, despite the fact that they were born and raised in the freest, most prosperous nation which has ever been. While others in third world countries die of starvation and disease daily, and don't even have fresh water to drink. These obese, self-righteous, unwashed modern hippies get out and protest against the rich of this nation, and then go down to McDonald's and grab a hamburger. Because it's just that easy. The answer is not to make this nation a third world country and to make everyone equal in the sense of wealth and amenities. God created all men equal already. However, it is where they go from there that makes the difference, that matters. Why is it that some Americans are amongst the most obese and demanding people on earth, while others come here from other countries and who in their own countries never had the opportunity to be whatever they wanted or to do whatever they wanted to do? Yet they come to America and become wealthy, while others who were born here, modern indigenous population, live off entitlement and do very little more than complain about how bad things are. We have seen it over and over again. Generations of entitlement-bred welfare cattle, demanding ever and ever more from the government, and demanding ever and ever more from those who have more than themselves. And if you think the word cattle is too harsh Consider how they are herded to the polling booths on promises of something for nothing, and then left disenfranchised once the elections are over. Are they not pawns in this game of power? Are they not pullers of the ropes which are attached to the nooses around their own necks? Of course they are. Only they don't see it. Because much like the rich man who turned his back on Jesus, they are blinded by the wants of this world, and will go on yelling and protesting with the crowds for the cause of communism, unaware as to what they're doing, and thinking in their own minds that they are freedom fighters, that they are accomplishing a good work for equality. Only the equality they seek is not equality of fairness, or the equality of striving to gain. Rather, it is the equality of Marxism, where no one may have anything more than anyone else, so that all are kept at a low level. And this goes right back to what I mentioned earlier about modern education and rewards for underachievement. Just so no one gets their little feelings hurt. This is not preparing people to live in reality or the real world. As a matter of fact, it sends the most negative message it can, which is, don't work, don't strive, don't try. Let others toil while you get a free ride and a free pass, simply because you'll whine if you don't get what you want, if you're held back. It doesn't take too much sense to figure this out. It's simply that these things never occur to people until it hits home. If you went to some of these protesters' houses and took their televisions and their cars and their computers and told them, sorry, but these are going to someone less fortunate than you, then what do you suppose would happen? Do you think they would say, ah, yes, take it all. I don't want to be evil because I have more than someone else. No, they'd probably grab a knife or a gun and try to blow your head off or cut you to pieces. In short, they are hypocrites. Most of them are paid to go protest anyway. They are a who's who of professional protesters, which go from this protest to that protest to the other protest. And they seek to overturn. They seek to do rebellion, which is, of course, the method of operation of Satan. Satan wanted to be God. He wanted to sit upon the mercy seat. He didn't want to be just a protecting cherub anymore. He wanted to be exalted. He wanted to be above the Most High. So because he didn't get that, he decided to make war on God. And he deceived 1/3 of God's children away from him, which is why we are living in this earth age now. This method has been passed down from generation to generation and enacted by the children of the first murderer. From umbilical cord to umbilical cord. From generation to generation have they planned this. I have various studies on these subjects, such as Play Actors and Hypocrites, The Seed of Moses, The Four Hidden Dynasties, all 4 parts, New Babylon, One World Government Rising, and so on. Also, Satan's Seed, Cain's Progeny. All of these will put together the picture of how this is coming about. Why everything seems so bad now. Why America is losing her place in the world as the world superpower. And why she shall soon go into global government. Because we have presidents, congressmen, senators, representatives who are anti-American. Not anti as in full of hatred for America, necessarily, though they do have it. But they're so bleeding heart and self-righteous till they want to make America the multicultural, politically correct mecca of the world. And take us from being the superpower to being just a voice in the chorus. And it is a symphony of destruction. At any rate, it is my prayer for you that you will rise above this, that your eyes will be opened, that you will have ears to hear, that you will seek the counsel of our Father from His Word, and ask for His wisdom daily, and pray that you be not amongst them, fighting against that which is good, as the scribes and Pharisees, who had rule over the church, denied Jesus Christ, the Son of God, who was the Father of the church. Thank you for listening. This has been Just Thoughts.